Whatever it takes. We gotta get back to the house. Things would move a lot quicker. In this crisis, for instance, and probably better policy too.
It looks like we're live. All right,
Yeah.
I think we're starting. Hold on in 15. I'm giving it a few more minutes just to make sure we get a chance for everyone to join us here today.
Sounds good.
Thank you again, Congressman, for joining us, and we'll just give it a few more seconds to get started so that way we can. All right, it looks like we're live. First of all, Congressman Crenshaw, Dan, you're a great friend, a great supporter, a great congressman, and we are very fortunate to have your service in Washington. And of course, we always want to start off by thanking you for your service as a U.S. Navy SEAL. Thank you for joining us today. And I want to start off by, if you could just give us a little bit of an assessment of what's been happening in Washington, where you think things have left off in terms of COVID response, and some of the roadblocks that Congress has faced during these first, this last 6 weeks in particular, in response to COVID, and what do you think needs to happen from here on?
So, a brief history of how Congress has been involved in the COVID-19 issue. The first time Congress was asked for anything was in about mid-February, maybe about February 23rd, I think. This was when the president asked for a few $1 billion to replenish funds and CDC, HHS, some funds that had been expended already, prepping for COVID-19. This is, let's all remember, this was back when nobody thought about COVID-19. In the month of February, I don't care what any Democrat says, they didn't think about it. We all know what the mayor of New York City was saying in February. And I don't necessarily blame them. I think there was just a lack of information. There was no reason to believe that there was an emergency. And that's just the way it was. But that being said, the federal government was taking a lot of steps at that point. And that funding, like every tranche of funding, was delayed unnecessarily. That week, we voted on a bill to ban flavored tobacco, which was just ridiculous. Both because why would we ban flavored tobacco, and also why wouldn't we have taken up the supplemental funding that was needed? The next time Congress really got involved was another relatively small package for additional testing. And then the big one, the $2 trillion bill, which was basically an economic rescue package, or an economics, let's call it a sustainment package. That's probably the right word. Stimulus is not the right word. Bailout is not the right word. It's an economic sustainment package that kind of does the best it can to keep businesses afloat as we've told them all to pause. And I wasn't in favor of everything in that package, but I was in favor of enough of it to get it going. We all know the history there. Nancy Pelosi deliberately delayed it for some very foolish reasons. She had a whole litany of progressive requests that had nothing to do with COVID-19. She was shamed pretty well for it. Later that week, it finally got through, but of course, after millions of jobs had already been lost. When we realized that the PPP funding, which is the small business side of that, was going to run out of money quickly, Treasury told Congress, "Hey, we need another injection of $250 billion." Nancy Pelosi said, "Oh no, I don't think so." I mean, that was her words. "No, I don't think so. We'll take a look." It took about a week or two later for us to actually pass that. And why did they do that? What's their reasoning? So they'll claim that what we really did was we got hospital funding in there and testing funding in there. Those Republicans, mean Republicans, they didn't want any of that. No, we didn't want any of that at the time, because the hospital funding still hasn't been spent now, let alone back then. There was already $150 billion that we put in the first set of funding for it. So it's an outright lie what they're saying. They would have you believe that we can only go to Washington like once every 3 weeks to vote. And that's not true. We could be there voting every single day if we wanted to. We could be tackling each problem as it arises and then finding a solution for it as it arises, not going in every few weeks with these crazy bills. I will not be supporting any huge bills from here on out. We have to do this the emergency situation was one thing. Now we have to think about this more deliberately. So what does the future look like? Unfortunately, Nancy Pelosi will continue to desire this crazy world where we never go in except to vote on a giant bill. She will claim that she's saving you. She will claim that she cares more about the American people because she wants to spend more of their money or their grandkids' money. This is not the way to govern a country, and it's flat out wrong. The only way to really get us back on track at this point is to allow a staged reopening. So we're doing that in Texas. I think it needs to happen across the country. I think New York is obviously a different situation. We're definitely praying for you guys, but that's where the front lines are. The rest of the country is not the same, and there's no reason to expect us to even come close to what New York actually had to experience, namely because of the population density and the fact that New York City is just a hub of international travel. I think it was always good to be expected that New York City would have a much bigger problem than any other part of the country. And frankly, to help New York City, because a strong economy throughout the country helps, well, every part of the country. We have to get ourselves back on track. Texas is doing that; it's leading the way. But I see states like California talking about lockdowns for another month, and there's just no evidence to support that. They don't have the outbreaks; their hospitals are empty. It doesn't make any sense. And so, there's the legislative side of what Congress needs to be doing, and there's the leadership side. Actually go in. Like, the Pelosi and Hoyer, they said that they're too scared. They literally said, no, we're too scared. The doctor said it's too scary. What kind of leadership is that?
If I can cut in one of the earliest questions that you had asked in your statement was, what was the city of New York and what was Mayor de Blasio doing? And it's ironic that now our mayor and others are criticizing the president for not having taken action. Meanwhile, when the first case came to the United States, or at least the reported first case came to the United States from China, this was the day in mid-January where they were signing impeachment articles. And you made a fabulous video, and I urge everyone to go on your Facebook page after this and watch the video of the timeline that you had put together, basically showing how disingenuous the Democrats have been. And even in the beginning of March, our mayor, Bill de Blasio, was hosting a meeting for all the legislators to come together so he could lobby us to allow for heroin injection centers. He wanted to have the Department of Health do a presentation on the need for heroin injection centers, as opposed to talking about the crisis. And it was completely outrageous. He did cancel it at the 11th hour, but for the first couple of weeks in March, that's where his attention and his focus was. But you bring up a really great point, Dan, about the need to reopen the economy. And of course, here in New York, we are in a different situation. However, there are things that we could be starting to do now, which I believe include outdoor construction. There's no reason why we can't have landscapers and pool installers and fencing companies starting to work now, and the governor is only looking to do that for upstate New York and leaving us behind. Essential surgeries, these are elective surgeries, and the word elective, people think we're talking about a tummy tuck or a facelift, but these are some serious conditions that if they go ignored, such as a woman who needs a mastectomy, or someone who has kidney blockage, or someone who even needs a hip replacement or a knee replacement and is a lot of pain, it can then become emergency surgery. So we want to restart that. And I've spoken to the governor about that, and he's just doing it for upstate New York. We're going to continue to push for downstate. But on a national scale, the economy the numbers are becoming very scary, unfortunately. And the Commerce Department released data showing that the U.S. economy shrank by a rate of 4.8% in the first quarter of this year because of this crisis. And that's the highest rate since the Great Depression. And another 3.8 million people filed claims for unemployment this week. So now we have a staggering 30 million who have filed for unemployment. And you've presented some really great ideas, which I agree with a lot of what you're saying in terms of and I'm doing it on a micro scale here, just in my state, because we have unique conditions. But I'd like for you to share what are some of your views and how we can go about this safely? And I know Phil Farinacci commented earlier on Facebook, and he's asking the question, you put your trust in the American people, saying that they can be trusted to go about this responsibly. And here's his question. You've been advocating for the reopening of America and have stated that we can trust the American people to safely return to work and revive our economy. So yes, please talk about what are some of your thoughts for those of us who are in liberal lockdown here in New York State.
Yeah, there's so many things there. It is really interesting. This is just sort of an observation. It doesn't make sense, but it's interesting to see how the debate between lockdowns and reopening is purely along partisan lines. I find that very strange, and it just is the way it is. Maybe it's political opportunism. Maybe it's something deeply woven into the psyches of the left and the right. I also wanted to say, we look forward to having you in Congress next year, but I'll tell you what, we're also very glad that you're there to be a voice of reason for New Yorkers, because it's at the state level right now where you're at, where this, you need to be on the phone with the governor and advocating for exactly what you're advocating for, which is very common sense policies. Listen, guys, like we understand the virus better than we did a month ago, and better than we did a couple weeks ago. We understand. I've seen the numbers from New York about the deaths and who's hospitalized and who isn't. I also just recently saw antibody testing. It looks like 20% of New Yorkers have had this, or at least in New York City. That's really significant. It tells us a lot. It tells us about, first, it is very contagious, but also it's just not nearly as deadly as we thought. And it also tells us who's actually vulnerable and who isn't. And it is overwhelmingly true that young and healthy are barely get sick. That's just overwhelmingly true. Obviously, there's a couple exceptions, but those are very, very small exceptions. Okay, so that knowledge is power. So, do we tell our elderly to get back into a crowd quickly, or even soon, or even in the next few months? No, we do not. They are probably going to continue to need to be locked down. But if you're young and healthy, is there any good reason to be locked down? No, there's not. Do we wear masks in public? Yes, but it also depends on what kind of public space you're in. Let's just be smart. If you're in a confined space, if you're on a New York subway, you should probably wear a mask. Okay, that should be a rule. It probably already is. Or a bus, or inside of a store. But walking on the sidewalk, it doesn't actually make sense. The data, the science doesn't support that. So don't be crazy about it. Our county judge here tried to do the same thing, and implement fines for that. So we'll say this one last thing as far as smart reopening. Testing, people just scream testing as if that means something. It does. You need to talk about the strategy of testing. So in Texas, like, we have testing capacity up here. We have the people who want it down here. So we have excess capacity already. People aren't going to get it. You need to get to a point where you're basically coordinating with the private industry and saying, listen, if you're a big business where a lot of people congregate a lot, okay, let's do sample testing, maybe weekly or even every couple of days, just so we can identify outbreaks quickly when it happens. That's a smart strategy to moving forward. It makes a lot of sense, I think, in a place like New York City.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Dan. Speaking about sidewalks, today, Mayor Bill de Blasio announced that we're going to be shutting down streets so people could have more space to walk outdoors. Yet he still hasn't made a determination on whether we're going to be opening beaches for the summer. So it's okay to walk on a street because he wants to shut down traffic, but it's not okay to be walking freely.
This is the kind of thing that's driving people crazy.
Golf
this is
courses
driving people crazy because people know this doesn't make sense. People know that in Michigan, it didn't make sense to block off a certain part of the store because they were selling gardening supplies. Hey, that doesn't make sense. We know that. And for the American people to want to respect the laws have to be respectable. We're not stupid. And so and I guess that's the real answer to that question, which is we're not stupid. So let us act like we're not stupid. I think that's the main point.
We want to take every safety precaution. People need to be smart about it. And I think that New Yorkers could be trusted to be able to walk on a golf course or play in the tennis court where you are socially distancing. Those are activities where you could socially distance and you can be responsible about it. And it just doesn't make sense. As you said, it was hypocritical that, now you could walk in the open street, but you can't walk on a beach in New York City for the time being. Anyway, I want to shift to China because I'm deeply concerned, and I've always been, about communist regimes. I've always been one of those, obviously, as a result of my upbringing. I'm the daughter of a Cuban refugee. I know how these communist regimes work. And I think that, there's a serious issue with China allowing people to leave the Wuhan region, knowing that there was a major issue there. The way they've silenced individuals who live in the region, doctors, people have gone missing, speaking out and sounding the alarm. I would really like to discuss with you for a moment the World Health Organization's communication or lack of communication with China. See, the president has decided to strip funding for the time being from the World Health Organization. But China, what kind of investigations do you believe need to take place? And how and in what capacity do you believe that we should be holding China accountable for the lack of communication? And well, let's start with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you laid out all the facts for the most part. There's, the Chinese deliberately lied. They deliberately allowed international travel, even while they were restricting domestic travel. They still won't let World Health Organization scientists in to investigate the origin of the virus. And then the World Health Organization itself, while the organization may be still a good thing that we want, the leadership needs to go. That's what we've been calling for. The leadership was ultimately bought off by China, and so they were spreading those lies, and ultimately did more harm than good to the entire world. So those things need to be rectified. Should there be an investigation into the World Health Organization? I'm not sure how to do that. I think the current strategy of withholding funding until they change out their leadership is the right strategy, because it's their executive leadership that's the problem. I think the World Health Organization it still plays a role that we want it to play, but the leadership needs to be changed out. With respect to holding China accountable, there's a lot of ways to do that, and hopefully some good political will to do that, and definitely hold your current Democrat representative to the fire on this. They don't want to hold. They know very well that China needs to be held accountable. They know that in private, but in public, they don't want to acknowledge it because they want so badly to blame Trump. And now they lost that battle mostly, and I'm going to take a lot of credit for them losing that battle because of that video that went so viral, because it just lays out the facts, and they can't dispute those facts. They cannot dispute them. In fact, they barely even tried. You notice that they don't even go down that route anymore because they know they lost that so badly. And so that's the only political issue standing in the way of bipartisan support for holding China accountable. And one way to do that, me and Tom Cotton have teamed up. He's in the Senate, me in the House, to basically allow you to sue China. Okay, because right now you can't just sue a country, okay, because of the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act. And so this bill would simply allow you to do that. And in practice, it would probably look somewhat like a class action lawsuit where we go after Chinese assets. But I'm not going to pretend that every American would get like a check. Of course, the Chinese aren't going to do that, but we can go after their assets. This is, maybe somewhat symbolic, but there is a sense of justice that is derived from that. Pulling our supply chains home is an important discussion being had. I think that's actually going to be very bipartisan. It's just,
we should not be importing food until they close their wet markets. I think that could be a good ramification and a sanction, and certainly get other countries. And this is something of global interest, and other countries like Italy and others that have been affected may want to join us in an effort to demand that they close wet markets.
Absolutely.
I want to talk a little bit about the healthcare system. You've had some really great ideas about healthcare as it pertains to both the veterans community and the global community. And so I was just curious on your thoughts. This has obviously shined a light on some of the lackings of our healthcare system, but also some of the good things about our healthcare system. And here, in New York City, we've had to have expansions of our existing hospitals for the duration of the crisis because there weren't enough beds. Where district I represent, we don't have a public hospital, so we're excluded from some of the programs that the mayor had put in place in terms of either testing or receiving some of the federal medics that were sent from President Trump to help New York City. And of course, with regards to having insurance and having proper coverage and access to healthcare, can you please talk about a little bit of what your observations are relating to healthcare and where we need to go with this? Because you know that the Democrats, the socialist Democrats like AOC and Ilhan Omar and the others are going to try to use this up as an opportunity, and Bernie Sanders certainly did, to try to push socialism, and we know that that's not the answer. In fact, it would make it much worse if you look at our response versus other countries.
Yeah, they They did try to do that, especially at first. I haven't seen that kind of rhetoric lately. I think mostly because it got slammed and counter argued so effectively right away. You know, the easiest answer to that is, okay, then explain Italy. Explain Italy. You know, they have supposedly this great
rationing of ventilators.
Right, the rationing ventilators, and also look at the numbers of ventilators and outside of Italy too. On a per capita basis, before all of this started, before we started manufacturing thousands of ventilators a week, we were actually still like way beyond capacity or anybody else's capacity with respect to ventilators and with respect to ICU beds. When it comes to acute care, the U.S. and specialty care, the U.S. is so far beyond any other country. It's it's apples and oranges. And is it free? No, it's not. Like it's not affordable either. So that's obviously the problem. But that is the problem. The problem is not our healthcare system. The problem is the warped way that we pay for it. And you know, all agreement on that. But you have seen rationed care in these other countries that were hit hard. And even in New York City, the place where it was hit the hardest, you still didn't see rationed care. And you know, there was expectations of needing thousands more ventilators, ended up not needing them, but we were ready to give them. I mean, we were manufacturing them quickly. Like our ability to produce that so fast was really unbelievable. And plus, again, we already had them. We had way more per capita than any other country. Here's the best simplest way to describe to somebody who's trying to advocate for socialized medicine and in terms of COVID-19. Socialized medicine fundamentally means this. You put price controls on care. You put price controls on care, and then you ration it out to everybody. That's what it is. Okay, that's fine. That's what all these other countries do. Well, what happens? That decreases supply. Anytime you put a price control on anything, any product, it decreases supply. Just by definition, it has to. If you're gonna tell doctors you're gonna pay them less, you're gonna get less doctors. If you're gonna tell hospitals you're gonna reimburse them for less, well, then they're gonna close things down. They're gonna close down certain services and just remain open for very essential things. You're not gonna have innovation. You're not gonna have drug companies wanting to innovate because what's the point? You're not gonna make a profit. Why would they do it? So that's the trade-off, and it's a major trade-off. And they're never honest about that trade-off. Now, if you just want the human race to basically have, you know, more or less a very basic level of care with the technology we have now, and that's it. You never want it to get any better, and you never want it to expand, and you want to wait in line for weeks and weeks and weeks for an MRI, then fine, advocate for socialized medicine. But you better tell people what the truth is about that socialized medicine. And in the case of a pandemic, when your biggest problem is capacity, we would be at New York City would have been way worse off, way worse off. People would have had to ration ventilators and ration hospital space, and it would have, it could have been much deadlier.
Yeah, well, look, and it's a good opportunity right now to thank President Trump for all he did for the people of New York. Everything New Yorkers asked for, we received from the president, and even Governor Cuomo, and a rare bipartisan, I guess, exchange between the two of them. We saw him acknowledge the president and say that he delivered for people of New York, and he did so by giving us more ventilators than we needed. He did so by sending millions of masks, sent the U.S. Navy ship Comfort, which I don't think was properly utilized by the state, but he sent it. He also signed off on a number of things, sent ambulances, and just tweeted a little while ago about the hundreds of ambulances and medics that they sent to New York from around the country to help us. And so, I certainly am a New Yorker that is appreciative that our governor and president were able to work together during this difficult time. But am particularly thankful that our president did not forget his home city and was there for us. While we're on the topic of socialism, let's just talk a little bit about AOC, rejoicing in the fact that the energy industry is having such a difficult time. And there was obviously the crash in crude oil prices, and just look at Venezuela. That's apparently what she wants. But if you could talk a little bit about, particularly as a Texan, this is a major industry, major employer for your constituents. And of course, we can't do much without crude oil. So,
no, you can't. And her comments are based in resentment, bitterness, just pure immoral behavior. I have nothing good to say about it. It's just so disgusting to watch her cheer the demise of people's livelihoods. More than that, they're based in ignorance, pure and utter ignorance. And the entire Green New Deal movement is based in ignorance. They claim to be the party of science. They're anti-science. They're completely anti-science. Now, I'm very outspoken on the environmental issues. I have put forth legislation for reducing carbon emissions via carbon capture technology. We will innovate our way to a cleaner world. That has always been true. It has always been true. The more developed a country becomes, the cleaner it becomes. That has always been the case. It always will be the case. In the United States, we have decreased carbon emissions by like 15% over the last couple of decades. That's entirely due to the shale fracking revolution. Entirely due, because we've moved towards natural gas so much. You know what AOC wants to do? Places like Boston and I believe New York City too. They import Russian natural gas. They import Russian natural gas. They refuse to build pipelines. They'll do everything they can to stop a pipeline being built so that we can get American natural gas to you guys to keep you warm in the wintertime. This is what they do. And you have to point this out. This is so important because it's crazy. It's anti-environment, it's anti-science, and it's anti prosperity, right? So here's why it's anti-environment too. One, natural gas is cleaner, so they'd rather import Russian natural gas. On a life cycle basis, Russian natural gas burns 42% more carbon emissions. That's what they'd rather do. This is where the ignorance comes into play. It's ideology that they're for. They hate the words fossil fuel. They don't know why. They wear clothes with synthetic plastics in them. Everything they do is basically created because of petroleum. They don't even know that. They don't care. For them, this is about control and resentment towards something they just don't like because they've been taught for years not to like it. This is one of the most devastating, I think, movements in America right now. This sort of ignorant environmentalism, and Republicans need to fight back with science-based environmentalism. But the problem with the Republicans is we've just sort of, ignored the issue and just kind of made fun of them for being crazy. But people still want to hear about a clean environment and they want to hear some solutions to it. And so that's what I try to give them.
Yeah, no, and we appreciate that, Dan. That's why we all love you. And you guys, and again, for those of you that are not following the congressman on Instagram or on Facebook or on Twitter, you really should. Because, and I wish I had the staff, the ability, the resources to put together the videos that you do. I just pick up my phone and I start talking to the people, but you put together some amazing quality videos that really explain the intricacies of various pieces of legislation. And sure, and I know because I've been in the legislature now it's my 10th year. They give everything all warm and fuzzy names, right? The Puppies Act, the Cute Puppies Act. Well, how can anyone vote against the Cute Puppies Act? Yeah. Well, if you want to really know what's in the Cute Puppies Act, you got to tune in to either Dan's page, my page. I do this a lot during session. I kind of break down bills because it is important for people to know what's in that. And in a campaign, they want to be able to send that mail piece to your district and say, Dan voted against the Cute Puppies Act. How could he? He's a horrible person. Right. And this is the political messaging, unfortunately, that we have to deal with. So when you hear people say, try to distort voting records, you really should go to the source and ask, why did you vote a certain way? And I always urge people to hold their legislators accountable by doing just that. We only have a few more minutes with you, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about your new book, which I tried to go to Amazon the other day and it said it's currently unavailable, which means that it must be doing extremely well. I heard it's a New York Times bestseller, and it looks really good because it's not really about politics, it's about life. And it's really about how do we adapt. And you've obviously, third tour, you wear an eye patch because you've lost your eye for this country when an IED was detonated when you were in Afghanistan. And you still did 2 tours after that, which is the amazing part. And I thank you on behalf of everyone watching for your service. You're a true American hero. I want you to give you an opportunity to talk about your book because it says, in times of difficulty, which right now a lot of people are experiencing, they've lost their job. They may have lost a family member, a loved one. They may be sick themselves and having challenges with their health. They could have, they don't know what's going to happen with their small business. now's an opportunity for you to adapt and grow from these experiences. And your message, I think, in this book is amazing. I'd like for you to share it with those who are watching.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it is sold out everywhere. Yeah, although, you can actually get signed copies still. They kind of come in and out of stock. So if you go to my Instagram account right now and you click on the first story, you'll be able to swipe up and get that. If you don't use Instagram, go to premiercollectibles.com, premiercollectibles.com. That's where you can it's the only place you can get the book right now. It's been sold out forever. So yeah, it's good news, and it's also bad news because I probably sell less because it's always sold out. So it's definitely an interesting time to come out with a book. It was originally written as a solution to outrage culture, sort of the petty, weak-minded, microaggression culture, cancel culture that we see all around us. And it's a book with lessons on mental fortitude and how to be better at life. It wasn't written for a pandemic, but the lessons certainly apply. We talk about perspective, and the need to engage in some perspective when times are hard. And I talk about my own story of being, blind in a hospital bed, but reminding myself that other guys are dead and I have it better than them. And it's like morbid to say that, but it's totally true. Or I reminded myself of my mother's cancer. And what she dealt with for years, trying to raise two boys, and as she was dying, and she eventually lost that battle. And so it doesn't matter how bad you have it. The truth is somebody has it worse every single time, no matter what. That is always true. And it's easy to engage in self-pity, but the way to be stronger is to overcome it and tell yourself a different story. Tell yourself a story of overcoming it. And so there's lessons like that. And there's also fun lessons in it that I think that people will just will like and be entertained by, about how to complain correctly. Like this, how to challenge yourself on a regular basis so that you become mentally tougher. And I do hope that maybe in the fall, when maybe hopefully students start going back to school, that the words microaggression they just seem silly to people because they've lived through something like a pandemic, which is actually hard, as opposed to the nonsense that a lot of people have thought was hard before.
Yeah. So I see we have a few more minutes here. So I want to shift into talking about sanctuary cities, because you and I are both opposed to sanctuary cities. I live in one. I don't know if you do, but we see how our tax dollars are being shifted to those who are here illegally, whether it be giving free health care to illegal immigrants, as Mayor de Blasio wants to do, or giving free college tuition to illegal immigrants, as Governor Cuomo wants to do. I was actually fortunate enough to push back enough on the mayor where we got him to actually add crimes to the list in which New York City complies with federal detainers, if you could imagine that. He actually did, after we pushed for a long time, he added sex crimes. So now forcible touching, sex abuse, promoting prostitution of a child, things that you think would be obvious where the government would comply with federal detainer requests. New York City was not doing, and he did change that policy thanks to the advocacy of myself and others. But there's a push in Washington in HR 1 that they wanted to go into automatic voter registration. And I'll tell you, in New York, it was problematic. And I was successful with my colleague, Assemblyman Colin Schmidt, to stop this proposal, which had a loophole that would have automatically registered people, even if they were here illegally. It was basically, you go to apply for a driver's license, which New York State now does provide for illegal immigrants. And they would automatically have that information sent over to the Board of Elections and register them to vote. They're saying it was, the federal law, the motor voter law is the problem, not that they were actually giving licenses or using automatic voter registration laws here in New York State. We successfully stopped that automatic voter registration bill. But I remember last year, in fact, it was Max Rose's first vote, I believe, the HR 1 bill, which would have done just that, automatically registered people to vote without the proper screening, without really checking to see, first of all, I don't know why anyone would be allowed to register to vote through the DMV if they weren't a citizen. If I'm using a foreign passport foreign document, why would you send my information to the Board of Elections? So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about preserving elections, preserving democracy, and our election system here in New York. As a veteran who you gave your eye for this country, you gave really so much for this country. I mean, isn't it important? I know it is important to you that we preserve our election system here, and how do we best do that in the face of these types of legislation that try to like find loopholes and try to, I think, mess with our voting system?
Well, I mean, there's the way to do it, and then there's the way to message it. Because I mean, our real problem isn't the solutions. We know what the solutions are. They're very simple. Just to have an election system that people can feel secure in. You know, of course, if voter ID makes sense. If IDs make sense for everything else we do in life, you know, they make sense for voting. It shouldn't. Automatic registration is of course problematic for many of the reasons you discussed. And you know, you think about stories I've heard in Texas where, you know, you're going down registered voter lists, and then you show up to a household full of people who aren't citizens. And you're like, why are you on the registered voter list? And they're like, I don't know. You know, they're not trying to do something wrong, but the system has no way of properly screening this. It isn't, and this is the Democrats' biggest folly. They always believe that some law they pass can just be implemented perfectly. They always believe that centralized planning can work. It doesn't work. It never works. You will have fraudulent activity, intended or unintended. It's and this is such a strange subject to debate, because elections seem to be the one thing that Democrats want less regulation over. And so you got to be very suspicious on that. Like, why is this the one thing that you don't want any red tape on? Like, how is that? What is going on there?
Are you a state that has voter ID requirement? Because I'm a supporter of that. I don't know how it disenfranchises people, especially now. Everyone,
insulting to people to tell them that. Yeah, and so and if you want to make the case for a good election system, I think Texas has a pretty good one. You know, so we allow mail-in ballots for the elderly and disabled, and that happens about a month before the election. And then there's 2 weeks of early voting, you know, from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and you can vote now in multiple places, not just your one. And then there's election day, and yes, you have to go in and you show an ID and then you vote. That doesn't disenfranchise anybody. It's crazy to say that. And you have plenty of opportunity to vote. You know, when I was on the Bill Maher show, they tried to hit me on the election thing, and it was just hilarious to slam back on this, because he's like, well, Republicans don't want people to vote because there was really long lines in Houston. And I was like, well, first of all, the county clerk who runs elections is a Democrat. So if you want to blame somebody, you're gonna have to blame Democrats. Second of all, you know, I don't even think Democrats had ill intent. They're just incompetent. They didn't, you know, and I don't know why people chose to go to that particular voting location. They could have gone to a different voting location. You know, like there's no reason to say that people are disenfranchised, and there's a lot of reason to say that our elections should be protected, and that when you vote, you shouldn't have the worry that your vote gets canceled out by somebody who votes who shouldn't be voting.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Dan. Look, I want to thank you for your time. If you want to, add a little more about your book, I think people really appreciate the message that you have, but we don't want to give too much. We want them to actually read the book. But look, I want to thank you for your support. I want to thank you for your endorsement. Since the day I got into this race for Congress, you've been there for me. You came to the district. As a matter of fact, it's a year ago this weekend that you were in the district. We did some activities in Brooklyn, and then we came to Staten Island and did a town hall for the veterans. And so you were one of the members of Congress, the first ones to support me, and I really appreciate that. I look forward to joining you in Washington, because we're going to have some serious issues. I mean, this is going to be tough for our nation. We need good leadership, people like you who are going to help us out of this crisis, to restore our economy, to get Americans back to work, to work on those whatever flaws we have in our healthcare system to improve for the next pandemic. And again, it's really an honor that you took some time out to speak to the good people of Staten Island and Brooklyn. And we hope you'll be able to join us before the election. If God willing, we'll be able to do things again in the state of New York, and you'll be able to travel to New York to see us again in person. That would be fantastic.
It was great to be with you, Nicole, and look forward to seeing you in Congress next year.
Thanks so much, Dan. Great to be with you. God bless you and stay safe.
All right, you too. God bless all of you. We're praying for you guys in New York.